This podcast is brought to you by the IIEA, sharing ideas, shaping policy.
And a very warm welcome to this IIEA webinar. My name is Barry Colfer, and I'm the Director of Research here at the Institute, just allowing people to enter the Zoom room and find their seats. So our event title for today is Can the EU's Affordable Housing Plan Help Tackle Homelessness? It's difficult to think, at a domestic level at least, of a more pertinent or a more pressing discussion to have in an Irish or European context. Our speaker is Ruth Owen. Ruth is the Deputy Director of FEANTSA, the European Federation of National Organisations Working with the Homeless. In her address, Ruth will examine the EU's efforts to address homelessness through its evolving affordable housing agenda. As the EU has no direct competence in housing, the responsibility for policies on and investment in social and affordable housing remains at the level of the member states. Drawing on over a decade of experience in homelessness policy, Ruth will explore the potential of EU initiatives to support more inclusive and effective housing solutions across member states, including the European Platform on Combatting Homelessness and the Affordable Housing Initiative as part of the Commission's Renovation Wave strategy for Europe. Ruth will consider the challenges of implementation, the role of national governments, and the need for integrated policy responses to ensure that affordable housing contributes meaningfully to the fight against homelessness. I'm now going to briefly introduce Ruth, go through the regular T's and C's regarding our events, and then hand over to Ruth for her presentation. So Ruth Owen, as I've mentioned, is Deputy Director of FEANTSA, the European Federation of National Associations Working with the Homeless, where she's worked since 2010. Ruth is an expert on homelessness and public policies to address it. She has a special interest in housing policy. Prior to working on homelessness, Ruth studied geography and worked as a teacher in London. As ever, the discussion today is on the record. Ruth is going to address us for about 20 minutes and I'll be using some slides, so keep your eyes peeled on the screen. After that 20 minutes, we'll be moving to our Q&A, and as ever, you can participate using the Q&A function on Zoom. That's it from me, but to say a very warm welcome to Ruth and a sincere thanks again for being with us, and over to you.
Thank you, Barry, for the introduction. Thanks for the invitation, and it's really great that the IEA is giving this space to an issue like homelessness, which is not always on the kind of cut and thrust of EU affairs. So thanks very much for that. I'm just going to open my slides and start showing my presentation with you. So hopefully you can now all see those slides.
We can see the slides. Perfect. Thanks, Ruth.
And the question I'm going to try and answer in the next 20 minutes is, can the EU's Affordable Housing Plan help tackle homelessness? So I'm going to cheat a little bit by giving you a very short answer first. My very short answer is yes, the Affordable Housing Plan can help tackle homelessness, but there are some points for attention, potential concern. I think some of what's on the table is not necessarily helpful. This plan doesn't exist yet, so it's too early to judge it. It will be launched in 2026. And I think that there's considerable work ahead to ensure that the plan actually does deliver on homelessness. Perhaps just a few words about FEANTSA before I jump into the more detailed answer. As Barry said, we're a foundation of NGOs working with homeless people across the European Union. And that's the core of our membership, our NGOs working with homeless people. But we very much recognise that we can't solve homelessness in the homeless sector. So we also have other members like foundations, cities, researchers, other non-profit organisations involved in the fight against homelessness. Our mission is to end homelessness in Europe, and the activities that we undertake to that end are research, learning and exchange, and advocacy. And I won't read you the whole list, but you can see the list there of our members in Ireland. We have, since the very beginning of FEANTSA, a very active and engaged membership in Ireland. So I'll start talking about homelessness, and then I'll say more about the Affordable Housing Plan. In terms of numbers, FEANTSA produces an overview of housing exclusion in Europe every year. It comes out in October this year, But the last one, 2024, estimated that 1.2 million people at least sleep rough or in temporary accommodation across Europe every night, around 400,000 children. 4% of the EU's population has experienced some kind of homelessness in their lifetime. In most member states, homelessness is rising, often quite rapidly, and Ireland would be an example of that. 32% of EU citizens consider homelessness to be an urgent and immediate problem. And homelessness is the kind of hard edge of a broader problem of housing exclusion, which mostly affects low-income households. So housing cost overburden rate, which is spending more than 40% of your income on housing. It's 30% of the population in the first income quintile who are in that situation, 8 in the second, and 4th in the third. So it really is very much concentrated in the lower income groups. This table is just to illustrate how the understanding of homelessness has evolved in the past at least couple of decades. So I think we've gone from quite a narrow understanding of what homelessness means, basically rough sleeping, towards a broad understanding of homelessness, which encompasses hidden forms of homelessness, like sofa surfing or living in very insecure, very inadequate housing. And FEANTSA has developed something called the European typology of housing exclusion, which is a kind of international reference definition. I think homelessness used to be seen as like you're a homeless person, that's a fixed state. It's now very much recognized that people move in and out of homelessness, and it's sort of part of residential insecurity, which is associated with poverty. We used to think that homelessness was really an issue for single middle-aged men, but it's increasingly evident that it also affects women, young people, seniors, children. The traditional understanding of homelessness is it's caused by personal failure, whereas in fact it's caused by the intersection of structural factors with personal circumstances. The way we used to think about responding to homelessness was you should fix the person, and now it's more about house the person. And I think the kind of traditional common sense, if you like, view of homelessness was that homeless people were not ordinary people, like somehow failure or victim or deviant, whereas in fact homeless people are rights holders like everybody else. And with that shift in understanding, I think has come a shift in understanding how to respond to homelessness. So temporary accommodation remains the predominant response to homelessness in the European Union, but in the homeless sector and amongst experts and amongst homeless people themselves, as well as a growing number of policymakers, there's a consensus that prevention and rehousing are what's actually needed to end homelessness. So this slide just shows the kind of variation of interventions that are needed to address homelessness. On the left hand is what we call, or what is called in America, rapid rehousing. It basically just means you need access to housing and nothing else to move on from homelessness. Whereas Housing First, the orange on the right, is a more complex kind of social intervention for homeless people with complex support needs. So they do need housing, but they have some other problems as well. And if they're going to stay in that housing and thrive, they probably need some other supports as well. And Housing First is an intervention that involves a package of rapid access to housing with these kind of social and health supports provided at the same time. And it's a sort of best practice in terms of responding to homelessness amongst people with complex needs. It's phenomenally successful, and it has brought homelessness down in a number of countries like Finland and Denmark. And it exists in many countries in Europe, but not at the scale that would be required to actually break homelessness levels down. Homelessness is a priority for the European Union, and the European Union took its first ever policy initiative on homelessness in 2021, which followed a decade of increasing attention to the issue at EU level. something called the Lisbon Declaration was signed by all EU member states, as well as stakeholders and EU institutions in 2021. And that launched this European platform on combating homelessness and set a common goal of working together towards ending homelessness by 2030. So that European platform on combating homelessness is still with us. The new commission in the new mandate has taken it up, and its activities are focused on data and analysis, so better understanding the state of homelessness and the trends, and working towards comparative data within the European Union, learning in terms of understanding what works, improving policies, and sharing best practices, and funding focused on trying to channel EU funding and finance into solutions to homelessness. So looking forward on what might come next, the second von der Leyen College has announced the EU's first ever affordable housing plan, as well as a European anti-poverty strategy and a new action plan on the European Pillar of Social Rights. So they're three quite big sort of social policy interventions, all of which could contribute to the fight against homelessness, and we would expect the affordable housing plan to have a strong role there. But those initiatives have been launched in a fairly challenging context, with the rise of populism, a strong rightwards shift at the political level in terms of both the College and the European Parliament, a lot of geopolitical uncertainty, and a very strong focus on defence and competitiveness as the big priorities of the European Commission. These are the two commissioners with lead responsibility on homelessness. So the Executive Vice President for Social Rights and Skills, Roxana Minzatu, who leads on the poverty side of things, and Dan Jorgensen, the EU's first ever commissioner with responsibility for housing, who leads on the affordable housing plan. So the affordable housing plan, it's this new kid on the block. It doesn't exist yet, but it's in the pipeline. I think it's really important to start by saying, what can the EU actually do on housing? Because it does have extremely limited competence, and it hasn't historically intervened on housing policy. Although in the very early days of the European steel and coal community, they did have a big social housing construction program, which I think is just interesting to keep in mind when we think about what this plan could do. But most responsibility for tackling housing policy, and certainly for dealing with homelessness, lies at the national, regional and local level. So the EU can contribute, and does contribute, through agenda setting, learning, knowledge and exchange, capacity building and technical support, investment, especially through cohesion policy, the structural funds. And there's all kinds of EU regulation that impacts, helpfully or less helpfully, on housing policy, even though we'll never have an EU directive on housing. And examples of that would be state aid, which we'll talk about a bit later, but also things like energy performance standards in buildings, tax policy. Many areas of EU law impact on housing policy. So what's happened so far with this EU Affordable Housing Plan? It was a surprise priority in von der Leyen's political guidelines. And she announced at that point that there would be this new commissioner responsible for housing and an EU Affordable Housing Plan, which would include a strategy for construction, a pan-European investment platform for affordable and sustainable housing, would allow member states to double cohesion investments for affordable housing, and revise the state aid rules for affordable and energy efficient social housing. And it also, one of the elements of this plan is something called the New European Bauhaus, which is a quite a personal initiative of von der Leyen, and it's a flagship initiative mobilizing lots of the centrally managed EU funds to try and transform the built environment in Europe to make it more beautiful, inclusive and sustainable. So what's happened so far? This year is really focused on consultation, dialogue and preparation. DG Energy, so the Director General of Commissioner Jorgensen has established a task force to develop this affordable housing plan. The European Parliament has set up a special committee on the housing crisis, which is going to provide an opinion to try and shape this plan. The Commission has set up an advisory board to advise the task force on affordable housing, and that is, we learned this week, to be chaired by Eamon Ryan, who's the former Irish Minister for the Environment, Climate and Communications, and also subsequently, I think, for transport. We've had the Commission's proposals for the midterm review of cohesion policy. So it's the midpoint review of the current 7-year budget of the European Union. And the Commission has proposed that member states can reprogram unallocated funds to a range of priorities, including affordable housing, but also including competitiveness and defence. So it's quite a crowded space. And they've published some model financial instruments that member states could use if they wanted to blend cohesion policy with loans and other kinds of repayable finance through the EIB or through InvestEU, which is the guarantee programme for EU investment. And they have started the concrete work on reviewing the state aid rules. So they have proposed to make it easier for member states to provide state aid for affordable housing. It was already possible for member states to provide state aid for social housing. There's a block exemption for social housing, but the proposal is now to add affordable housing and allow member states to provide state aid for that too. So I see some really good news here. I think the continuation of the European Platform on Combating Homelessness and maintaining the ambition of the Lisbon Declaration under this mandate is really positive. And we can see, I think Ireland is a good example, the fact that this Lisbon objective of ending homelessness by 2030 is taken up in the government programme. It shows how that kind of agenda setting can make a difference. There's strong political commitment to make homelessness a priority in the affordable housing plan from both commissioners, from the European Parliament, from member states, from the other EU institutions, and also from local policymakers. So there's an alliance of 15 mayors of big cities who have published an affordable housing plan and who are very strongly pushing for the European Union to help them deal with the housing crisis. And they've asked for a special fund for the fight against homelessness. And I think there's a general recognition, certainly within the Affordable Housing Task Force, that the support and scale up of Housing First and other housing-led responses to homelessness should be a real priority in this plan. However, there are also some alarm bells, and I would encourage you maybe to have a look at this report, which is on our website on the right. It digs in a little bit more to the question of what does affordable housing actually mean? Who is it affordable for? I mean, at the end of the day, all housing is affordable for somebody. I'm from the UK, and their affordable housing products can be 80% of the market rent, which certainly in big cities is really irrelevant for anyone who is experiencing or at risk of homelessness. So affordable housing is not social housing, or not necessarily social housing, and we see some potential tension and conflict between these terms. I think there's a narrative which is pushing affordable housing as an alternative product to social housing, but there's no European definition of affordable housing. We don't know who provides it, on what basis, for profit, non-profit, how long should it be affordable for, is it rental, is it ownership? There are a lot of unanswered questions, and I think that is happening in a context where public support for housing is, in many countries anyway, drifting more towards market provision. And even within the social housing sector, we see that the most affordable units of social housing are declining, whereas more expensive forms of social housing are growing. So I think this affordable housing is not a neutral concept, and it's something that we should challenge and push the Commission to at least better define. And I think that there's a failure linked with that to really define housing needs. Like everybody needs housing, but some people already cannot access and keep a decent place to live. And there hasn't really been any proper assessment of housing needs in terms of new households, overcrowding, homelessness, etc. There's just there's a narrative about we're in a housing crisis, we need more affordable housing. There's a strong focus on the middle class, on young people, and on certain types of key workers like teachers and policemen, but less. You hear much less about other key workers like cleaners. And of course, all of those types of households are important and need to be able to access and keep adequate housing. But what's really missing is the relationship with income. Like, not all young people, for example, are equally vulnerable on the housing market. And when defining housing policy interventions, we really have to take care of that. There's a big focus on leveraging private investment and injecting liquidity into the market. And in the background, that is the Capital Markets Union and Savings and Investment Union, which are all about trying to leverage capital and mobilize investors in the housing market. There's a lot of uncertainty about the post-2027 budget of the EU, so it's going to be probably quite radically reformed. With cohesion policy, as we know it, may disappear, and so that leaves a lot of questions about where the money for implementing this plan might come from. I think there's insufficient attention to the policy levers beyond supply, and the ambition to decarbonise Europe's building stock isn't really matched by workable plans to make that affordable for poor households. So FEANTSA has a number of recommendations about how to make this plan work for homeless people. We think it should be used to support Housing First and other housing-led models that we know work. We think that we need to earmark funding for homelessness and have a dedicated space in this investment platform, as well as training, learning, and capacity building activities, because these soft instruments can make a huge difference on an issue like homelessness, where the status quo is very poorly aligned with evidence. We think that there should be a focus on improving national homelessness policies, and that a council recommendation on homelessness would help that, as well as monitoring of progress and technical support. We think, as I've said, that social housing should be the priority, and that we should be quite weary of this positioning of affordable housing as a kind of new way of doing housing policy. We think we should explore the scope for minimum standards for tenant protection under EU consumer law. They exist for mortgages, but they don't exist for tenancies. And we think that the EU's research capacity could be much better used to address knowledge gaps on housing. When it comes to state aid, I think we're very worried that the introduction of affordable housing in the decision on services of general economic interest could crowd out public support for social housing, and that would be to the detriment of those who are most vulnerable in our housing systems. So in conclusion, I think homelessness will not be solved at the EU level, but EU cooperation can definitely help. To end homelessness, we need to prevent more homelessness and rehouse more homeless people. The Affordable Housing Plan could cover investment in social housing, scaling up Housing First and housing-led models, earmarked funds for homelessness, the Council recommendation, monitoring of progress, as well as training, learning, capacity building, and research. If we just focus on boosting the supply of affordable and sustainable housing in the market without defining the kind of how and why, I don't think this plan will benefit people experiencing homelessness and housing exclusion, and it might even, in the long term, make housing affordability worse in Europe. So, as I said, I think there's a lot of work ahead. And I think that the Irish presidency coming in the second half of 2026, once the plan is launched, will mark the kind of beginning of the implementation period and will be a really important moment for making sure that we get the most possible impact out of this affordable housing plan. So I think I ran a little bit over time. Sorry, Barry. That's it for the presentation.
This podcast is brought to you by the IIEA, sharing ideas, shaping policy.